Greetings and welcome to another impressions video here at Words About Games, and today we're going to be looking at Bleeding Edge. Bleeding Edge is a multiplayer brawler that combines the character-based abilities and objective-based gameplay of a hero shooter with Ninja Theory's trademark melee-focused combat and a dash of MOBA-ish pacing and fights. Two teams of four enter a variety of maps to battle it out and complete objectives in a race to get the highest score. Bleeding Edge is a weird game for me to try and judge, which is something I've felt ever since I dropped multiple hours into the beta a month ago. It's not that I think it's a bad game, or that I've even had a bad time with it, but it feels very unmemorable. Like, even though I've just been playing it with friends, I'm struggling to remember many details about the matches I played, though the game itself. My notes have been a lifesaver in writing this video. Again, it's not that it's necessarily a bad game. In fact, Bleeding Edge is actually built on a fairly solid foundation. The core combat is fine enough. It's nothing particularly spectacular, but it's competent, which is a little underwhelming coming from the studio behind the likes of DMC and Heavenly Sword. While there are a few characters who use ranged attacks, the majority of the roster is focused on melee combat, which is serviceable. Bleeding Edge isn't a game about dealing out huge amounts of damage or melting down an enemy's health bar in a matter of seconds. Fighting feels very much like attrition. Deciding to take a fight sees you needing to commit to it, coordinating with your team, and knowing when to disengage or hold back. Ninja Theory seem to have taken a few inspirations from MOBAs, and combat feels very deliberately paced as a result, which makes combat feel more strategic than your average brawler, but it also makes your attacks feel weightless. No matter what's happening on screen, it never feels like you're having any impact on your opponent. Even more special abilities feel like they're not really doing anything. They are flashy though, which makes for a lot of visual chaos and huge brawls between multiple players, and it can be pretty difficult to keep track of what's actually happening on screen at any given moment. I did find brief moments during my time with the game that I'd call good, but those were few and far between, and usually reserved for smaller confrontations with limited numbers of participants. Bleeding Edge has somehow found a way to have slow-paced combat coupled with visual chaos, which isn't a great combination. The fundamentals of combat and how it works are solid, but the execution makes everything feel a bit lifeless despite the pageantry. Like smashing brightly coloured action figures together rather than any sort of deeply satisfying brawling. The diverse roster of characters with an equally diverse set of abilities should have been enough to pick up the slack. Ninja Theory have done a good job stretching their imaginations to present a wonderfully varied cast with creative abilities. The game's three different healers, for example, are all very distinct from one another, each suiting very different playstyles. Zero Cool directly heals allies with a healing beam, Miko has a burst healing ability as well as the ability to heal nearby allies by attacking enemies with a staff, and Kulev drops totems that can heal, buff or shield allies as well as debuff enemies. Different characters play vastly different from one another, even ones that share the same class, which can make it quite fun when you find the character that suits your style of play. You can also unlock mods, which can be equipped to characters to change how their abilities work. You can, for example, add a mod to Buttercup's Oil Slick ability, which creates an area of effect that slows enemies caught in its radius, to also buff your allies' damage. There are a lot of really creative ideas in the cast, their abilities, and how each character synergizes with the rest of the roster, or how different characters approach fights with the others. It's just a bit of a shame that there's no real punch to the combat, which makes a lot of the excellent character work feel a bit meaningless. There's also a heavy emphasis on teamwork. If you're not at least partly coordinating your movements with your team, you're toast. It's as literally as simple as that. Work together and win, work alone and lose, which is something of a double-edged sword. I've played in a few closely contested matches in the past few days. Two teams with decent compositions working together to get the best result they can feels pretty good. More often than not, however, matches tend to be a blowout. Either you end up stuck with a team who aren't pulling together or coordinating their moves, and you get curb stomped, or vice versa, and you administer said curb stomping. Either scenario is deeply unsatisfying. You either spend 10 minutes chasing enemies across the map who move at the same speed as you and picking them off one at a time, or you spend 10 minutes getting smashed in the face repeatedly. The former is pretty boring, and the latter is deeply frustrating. Bleeding Edge hasn't been helped at all by feeling almost unfinished at launch. There are only two different modes: Power Collector, where teams must fight over power cells and drop them off at designated points on the map, and Objective Control, a King of the Hill-like mode where players fight over control of objective points. There are some really interesting ideas in these two modes. Not all objective points are unlocked at once, and which ones are unlocked rotates as the match continues, but there's so little here that it begins to feel a bit repetitive after just a couple of hours. And for all the creativity in how Ninja Theory have approached the mods themselves, that doesn't really help when you're running the same two mods over and over again. It also doesn't help that Objective Control is a far superior and better executed mode than Power Collector. A suite of well-designed maps could have helped alleviate some of the repetition, but there aren't many, and the ones that are here don't really stand out from one another. Each map has one unique feature: a train that blasts through the centre, moving control points, bombs that occasionally fall on objectives. But even with these features, none of them really stand out as particularly interesting playgrounds for Bleeding Edge's combat. When you put all of this together, it just makes Bleeding Edge feel like a game that needed more time before release. There are some good ideas here for Ninja Theory to build from. The diverse roster is a highlight, and they've taken a really interesting approach to how their mods work. But there's too much that doesn't feel like it's quite there yet. Combat feels weightless, the heavy emphasis on teamwork backfires more often than it works, and there just aren't enough different mods or interesting maps to keep the game from feeling repetitive after just a few hours. Thanks very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, consider sticking around here at Words About Games. Our content includes review impressions of games big and small, a weekly podcast dedicated to discussing the happenings in and around the games industry, weekly opinion videos, reactions, debate-driven top 5 and top 10 lists, a regular Hall of Fame series where we discuss our favourite games, and indie game spotlights. We also stream every Friday and Saturday at twitch.tv/wordsaboutgames. Most importantly, have a brilliant day.